Uh, this topic actually struck me really in terms of thinking about Alberta and its overall tax advantage and how important it is for Alberta as a province. I know some people often take a view that why do we worry so much about taxes? Governments need to provide health care and education, and certainly that is the case. But I think there is a very significant issue that's often involved, and that is from a policy framework, a jurisdiction which is relatively far away from, let's say, large centers of population and has cold weather. What can they do from a policy framework to sort of tilt the playing field to themselves? And as some of you know, I've argued this quite strenuously over the past 10 years for Canadian public policy in general, that if we wanted to do well in the North American climate, we had to make sure that we adopted those kinds of policies that would tilt the playing field towards Canada, particularly living beside a very large country to the south of us, where if you go back 15 years, that country had lower levels of taxes. They had a much better fiscal framework. We were running debt that was over 100, gross debt that was over 100% of GDP, net debt that was close to 75% of GDP. We were certainly high deficit, high tax country in 1994. And as we know, we have undertaken, as George has mentioned, a lot of policies in Canada dealing with the deficit, dealing with our high debt over the past 15 years. And we have actually done a remarkable job even on the tax front, where if you go back to the year 2000, Canada had the highest corporate income tax rate. This is the average of the federal provincial corporate income tax rates. The highest average corporate tax rate, statutory tax rate, amongst all OECD countries. This was in the year 2000. We also had a tax on capital, which I call the effective tax rate in capital. I'll talk about more later on. But we had one that was also one of the highest in amongst OECD countries. In fact, when I started doing OECD comparisons back in about 2004, Canada was third highest amongst all the OECD countries, even at that time, and we had already started to cut corporate income taxes during the past decade. And in fact, I'm going to give you some numbers today that are actually very good news in terms of what we are doing here in Canada. But luckily, as we went into this very deep global recession that has occurred over the past year, Canada's balance sheet certainly looked much, much better today than it would have if we had that same recession occurring back in 1994. And I think we really have to commend ourselves as a country for the tremendous progress that we've done over the past 15 years. And now we're starting to look like a jurisdiction that's got its act in order compared to the United States. And I do believe that the fiscal framework that we have undertaken over the past number of years has helped us tremendously as a country in tilting the playing field to ourselves and making Canada certainly a much stronger economy as a result. And I think the key test, of course, is how we do that in the future. Now, this actually then turns really to my point about Alberta. Alberta has had an important tax advantage over the years, and I'm going to be going through that exactly the elements of that, and that has tilted the playing field to Alberta and has helped it tremendously. But I want to lay out today that actually in some areas now Alberta no longer has a tax advantage, and that's going to be with respect to the taxation of capital investments. Where the significant advantage still remains for Alberta is with respect to labor taxation. However, the key issue is what's going to happen over the next number of years. And as we know, Alberta has been growing, has been facing certain fiscal challenges, particularly in an attempt to, it has, over time, it has grown its public sector at a relatively fast rate over the past 10 years, relative to GDP. And as a result, there are going to be certain threats to it, and that's what I'm going to outline to you today, that it is quite possible that even in the area of labor taxation, we might see that advantage is going to erode over the next decade. And in fact, in the area of capital taxation, if we're not careful, we're going to be putting ourselves in a disadvantage, actually, not even an advantage, relative to other jurisdictions in Canada, particularly. So let me sort of trace through some of the story now. And I'm going to begin with talking about marginal effective tax rates in capital. Now, some of you might wonder, what the heck is a marginal effective tax rate in Canada? A marginal effective tax rate. Well, let me first of all start by saying that our Minister of Finance in Ottawa, Jim Flaherty, often talks about the marginal effective tax rate. In fact, now that's become very common parlance in policy circles in Canada, as well as many other parts of the world. In fact, some of the work that we do actually is used by the World Bank and a number of countries, and not just here in Canada. And the way that we calculate the marginal effective tax rate on capital is really getting a sense of how taxation actually affects the decision to invest by businesses. And the way that you can sort of think of it is we take into account corporate income taxes and capital taxes, the remaining ones of the provinces. We also take into account sales taxes on capital purchases, which in Canada the most important has been the retail sales tax on capital purchases. And we effectively annualize that as a share of the return that's earned by businesses on their investments. So you can sort of think of it, if a company earns a 10% rate of return pre-tax and it has a 50% marginal effective tax rate, then what's left over is 5%, which is paid to investors. And the assumption, or at least the work, is based on the idea that the company is just, this is what's important at the margin, it's just able to attract enough, it just is able to earn a sufficiently high rate of return after tax that it can attract financing from its investors. And so that's conceptually the idea. There's actually a lot of work that goes into it. So I doubt really Jim Flaherty understands exactly how these calculations work. In fact, I'm sure he doesn't. But I can tell you the Department of Finance understands it very well. And in fact, we work very closely with them. Well, let me now first show you the first set of numbers. And I should say there is, the publication is actually at the back for those that want it. In fact, all the numbers are in there. And you're certainly welcome to take a copy. We're releasing it this morning. And these are the calculations that we've done for Canada, taking into account all these numbers. And we've done it by province, and we've also done it by industry. So I should say that there's actually a lot more numbers, and by assets. So there's a lot more numbers that go into this. But this basically gives you an idea. The blue bar is the 2008 numbers. These are the numbers last year. 2009 is sort of taking into account the recent budget impacts of last winter on the marginal effective tax rate. And you can see that it's gone down slightly in Canada from 2008. This is reflecting some corporate rate reductions that have happened, and also some fast write-offs that were introduced by some governments for capital investments. But you can see that the most dramatic changes are really occurring by 2013, where there's going to be very sharp rate reductions at the federal level in corporate rates, where it's going to go down from 19% this year down to 15%. There's also some provincial rate cuts. There is some removal of some of the fast write-offs, like for manufacturing and processing equipment. They won't be as generous in 2013 as they were before. But the really dramatic changes that are occurring are in our sales tax harmonization, particularly with respect to Ontario and British Columbia. And you can see that Ontario's marginal effective tax rate, which in 2009 was roughly around 33.6%, is going to plummet to below 20% by 2013. In fact, it's going to really sharply dive in 2010 when sales tax harmonization comes in Ontario. And removing those taxes on capital inputs in Ontario is going to have a very substantial impact in reducing taxes on capital investments in Ontario. Plus, Ontario is reducing its corporate income tax rate from 14 to 10%. So that's going to also have a very significant impact as well. So Ontario, as you can see, is moving down to the Alberta level. In fact, there's going to be virtually very little difference between Alberta and Ontario by 2013.